Hey guys, it's Courtney, and today I am going to be creating a very simple scene with the No Probllama stamp set by Honeybee Stamps. And I am starting off here with a piece of Nina Solar White 80-pound cardstock, and I'll be stamping with Intense Black ink by Simon Says Stamp. And I'm going to start with this little blanket, I guess it would be, on this llama's back. Now, the way this stamp is shaped, you do not have to mask it. I don't trust myself lining it up, so I am masking it. This is just a piece of Eclipse masking paper, and I'm stamping that and just fussy cutting that out, and I will mask that out before I stamp my llama. Next, I'll move on to the llama. Now, this is a really big stamp. Both stamps, both the llama and the cactus in the stamp set are pretty large, so you don't really have to worry about too much of a background here. But I am stamping this on that piece of Eclipse masking paper, and then I'll go ahead and stamp this onto my card panel. I'm going to go ahead and fussy cut this mask out. Now, there is fur on the side of this little guy. I'm not really worried about that. I'm not going to go in and out through all those little pieces of fur. Most of it I'm going to be able to cover up after I do my ink blending. You just want to make sure that you're cutting as close to or right on top of the black line from the ink as possible, so that when you do your ink blending, you don't have that white halo around your image. Once this little guy was masked out, I moved on to the cactus in the stamp set. And again, taking a piece of the Eclipse masking paper, and I'm going to be using 2 of these. So I'm going to stamp 2 of these on the masking paper, and I'll fussy cut those out as well. For the card panel itself, I'm going to stamp 1 right to the right side of the llama, and then 1 kind of in back of him. So I didn't want the bottom of the cactus to show underneath him, so I just took my finger and wiped off the bottom. It did smudge a little bit. I must have had a little bit of ink left over, but it'll be covered with the Distress ink. Again, I fussy cut these out and not worried about these little prickly things. I don't know what you'd call them, but on the cactus, I'm just cutting right over those and masking these out. Now, we are going to create a very simple scene here. We're going to do ink blending with Distress inks, but because most of this card panel is already taken up with these images, we don't have to worry about being too perfect. So I started off with another piece of this Eclipse masking paper, and I'm just cutting a curved line from it, and this will be my hill, basically. I'm just freehanding this. It doesn't need to be perfect because we're going to reposition this. At first, I was going to put my shading above the hills, and then I changed my mind. So I'm starting off with antique linen, and I'm just putting down a base coat here, very light hand, basically covering up from the bottom of the card panel up to maybe about 2/3 of the way up. Not worried about getting a perfect blend here because we are going to go back over it. Next, I took the negative piece, and I wanted my shading to be below the little hills. So moving on with my vintage photo and just creating the shadow. So most of my ink blending tool is on the masking paper itself, and just a small amount is actually going on the card panel. You can see right there off to that right hand side, my mask didn't reach the edge of the card. So there's a little area there that doesn't really match up too well. We'll fix that later. Once I had my vintage photo down and I was happy with the placement of my hills, I went back in with the antique linen and covered up that entire area again, just blending that out a little bit so the lines aren't too harsh. Next, for the sky, I will be using tumbled glass and salty ocean. Starting off with my tumbled glass, going from the top down to where my little sandy area is. Then I'll go in with my salty ocean and just put this on the very top of the card, and then go back in with my tumbled glass and blend that out down to my little sandy area. Once that was done, I removed my masks and we'll move on to the Copic coloring. Now I'm trying something new today. I've never tried this before, so I figured why not record it? Maybe I'll learn something. You guys can give me some tips. I am starting off with my lightest warm gray. This is a W1, and I'm covering up the entire llama. And I'm going to try Stippling. He's furry, so I figured this is a good image to try. I watched a video several weeks ago, a couple of videos on this, so I figured I'd give it a try. Next, I'll go in with my darkest color, and I'm just putting little dots where my darkest areas will be. Where it's really dark, I'm putting these dots close together, and then I kind of separate the dots as I move further away from that area. These are basically where my shadows are. So where his little neck is, or chin, I guess, off to his little side there where it appears to be a little fluffier, and then off to the left side underneath his tail and behind his legs. Next, I'll go in with my W7, go right over those dots and extend them out even further. Again, the further away that I get from my darkest areas, the dots aren't as close together. Next, I'll move on to my W3. Again, going right over those same areas and extending those out even further. This looked a little crazy to me, so I ended up putting little dots pretty much over his entire body, with the exception of his ears and his nose or snout. I don't know what it would be called on a llama. Next, I went in with my W1 again and covered up that entire area, just kind of blending those little dots out so that they weren't so pronounced. I decided to go back in a little bit and add a few more shadows. Being he has his little head turned towards us, I wanted there to be more of a shadow from his little chest up. So I just added a few more dots with the W7 and W5. For his ears and his nose, I'm keeping these solid. These wouldn't be as furry. So starting with my W5, blending that out with my W3, and then going back in with my W1. I did add a little bit more shading to his face as well. Again, just going back in with my W7, W5, and W3. For the cactus, I am covering up this entire area with my YG93, which is my lightest color. Really wasn't sure how to shade this because I'm not really concerned about a light source here. So what I did is I ended up going in with my darkest color, which is my YG99. And I just put lines. I'm not doing any kind of flicking here. Lines on either side of this middle area, but not all the way up. And then on either side where this cactus is coming up, just from underneath going up, because the sun would obviously be in the sky shining down. So I wanted my lightest area to be in the center and towards the top. Blending those lines out and just making those a little bit thicker with my darkest midtone. Then I'll go in with my YG95 and extend those out even further. And then going back in with my YG93, which is the lightest color again, and just blending that entire area out. I did the same thing with this other cactus. This time when I put my shading in that center part of the cactus, I kind of curved that up to the next side. I don't know what you would call these little spots or little areas that kind of stem out. but I extended my shading a little bit towards there, and I actually liked the way that looked a little bit better. So after I got done coloring this cactus, I went back in and added just a little bit more shading to that area from the first one. I'm coloring right over the little prickly things. I'll worry about that later. I'm going to go in with a gel pen and add a little bit more detail to these cactus later. Once the cacti or cactus were colored, I moved on to this little blanket that is on this llama's back. And I'm going to be coloring this like a golden yellow and red. I'm starting with my golden yellow. Whenever you're using red, save that for last. It does bleed and it's nearly impossible to take away. So I'm starting with my Y23, then moving on to my darkest color. And I'm just putting a little bit of shading on either side of the blanket. Moving on to my mid-tone, extending those flicks out a little further, and then I'll go back in with my lightest color and blend all of that out. For my reds, I'm just being very careful here, covering up these entire little squigglies with my R43. Then moving on to my darkest color, just a little bit on either side. I'm not doing any flicking because I don't trust myself having enough control not to go out of these lines. Going in with my mid-tone, the R46, and then blending that out with my R43 again. These little tassels that are hanging on the bottom, I went in with my R46 and just added a small little dot to those. Now for the sand, I'm doing a little bit more of this stippling, and I'm just adding some shadows around his little feet and around the cactus, and then just some different areas, kind of sporadic. I don't have any rhyme or reason for them. Starting with my darkest color, then moving on to my E55, going over those same dots, extending those out a little further. Then I'll go in with my E53, again going over the same area and extending those out even further. The E53 seems to be just slightly darker than the Antique Linen Distress ink. So this allows you to get a little bit of texture without totally changing the color. I did end up adding a few little dots to some random areas with the E53, again, just to add a little bit of texture. Next, for my sentiment, I'm going to be stamping with VersaFine Onyx Black ink, and I'm taking two of these little sentiments. One will be here on the top left-hand corner, and the next will be on the bottom right-hand corner. And I'm not embossing these. I'm just, usually you get a pretty crisp image with this VersaFine ink, so I'm just stamping these flat. Next, I took a Jelly Roll gel pen. This is a glaze pen. And you can see this gives it a little bit of dimension, and it's really solid black. Just take off this little plastic piece that's on the tip, test it out on a scrap piece of paper, and I'm just going over these little prickly lines that are part of these cactus. You want to go very quick because the longer you keep the pen down on the paper, the thicker the line will be. But this will make these pop out a little bit and give it just a little bit of dimension as well. Next, for his little feet or hooves, I guess, if he has them, they weren't as solid when I stamped, or maybe because of the distress ink, it kind of faded those out a little bit. So I just went in with my W7 marker and darkened those up, as well as his little nose. And that's it for today. Thanks guys for stopping by, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day.